I do want to offer a few thank yous before I get into a few words about Dr. King. First of all, my longtime friend and social friend and former neighbor, Rashawn Baker, is doing a great job. He's bringing fresh air to Prince George's County. It's something we've got to be proud of. Angela also Brooks, who you heard of, who did a fine job, and you can't believe she's only 18. You know? She's accomplished so much already, and there's a whole world out there for her, and to her whole family. Thank you all. And in terms of the very basics, food and shelter, I do this every year, but Mario Rapoli, three brothers, always wonderful working with me. If I do want to go home, I want to thank my family. My wife, Joan Rothgeb, my daughter, Sarah Pinsky, and my mother-in-law, Dorothy Rothgeb, who has been working for many, many, many years, I'm not supposed to talk ages, for progressive causes and Democrats and a lot of other people, and is still at it. Thank you, Dorothy. Thank you, family. A group of activists take to the streets. They demand that the American president and Congress help the poor get jobs, maintain health care, and afford decent homes. This was written recently by someone in the Denver Post. They also talked about these people who put up tents. Occupy Wall Street? No. They weren't talking about Occupy Wall Street. That description actually was about the Poor People's Campaign that Angela talked about earlier. That was created by Dr. King 43 years ago. 43 years ago. He understood very clearly that racial justice and economic justice were inextricably linked. He understood that. A lot of other people didn't. And unfortunately, Dr. King was assassinated soon after they started organizing for the campaign, for the Poor People's Campaign. Obviously in April, and the Poor People's Campaign came later that summer, but he had already started working on it. And they started that campaign, and thousands of people came out and camped on the National Mall. It was muddy, it rained a lot, it was a mess. It starts to, start thinking, what we read about in the paper of the current Occupy movement. So in fact, that is a direct descendant of what Dr. King saw and envisioned and worked for before his death 43 years ago. 44 years later, economic justice remains elusive for many Americans. And I want to give you a few statistics. Soon after Dr. King worked and spent his life on racial justice, economic justice, keeping money here at home rather than foreign wars, we got down to 32 million people below the poverty level in the late 80s, much as a result of his work. Unfortunately, we've had 4 years of a terrible economy. We've all seen it. We've all suffered. And that number is going up. And today, we're at 46 million below the poverty line. 46 million of the people have slid into the misery that Dr. King spent all his years working for. And among African Americans, 27% below the poverty level. And as you recall, when Dr. King died, he was in Memphis helping sanitation workers get union rights, be able to have decent wages, hours, and working conditions, helping working people. 46 years ago, he said, even though President Johnson said today that we have never had it so good, we must honestly say that for many people in our country, they've never had it so bad. Poverty is a glaring, notorious reality for some 40 million Americans. I guess it wouldn't be so bad for them if it were shared misery, but it is poverty amid plenty. And think about how this resonates today in 2012. It is poverty in the midst of an affluent society. And I think this is what makes for great frustration and great despair in the black community and the poor community of our nation. population generally. Earlier we heard about shared sacrifice. There have been times during the Depression, grandparents, great-grandparents suffered mightily in this country. And people had to tighten their belts. But it's kind of hard to do that when other people are having more and more and more. And when you look around, not very far away, at that juxtaposition of wealth, that's when it gets difficult. We all have to kick in, we all have to give in occasionally, we have to sacrifice, we do it in our communities every day, in our civic associations, our churches. But as a society, when not everyone is doing it, it makes it very, very difficult. So let's move the clock forward 40 years. That's what he said, Dr. King said. A recent report from the Congressional Budget Office that was reported on in October, it said that the share of after-tax household income from the top 1% of the population more than doubled between 1979 and 2007. It doubled. The most affluent fifth of the population, the top 20%, received 53% of after-tax household income in 2007. So what that means is the top 20% in the United States received 53% of after-tax income, and the bottom 80% received 47%. Top 20%, bottom 80%. The top 20% received more income than the bottom 80%. And then in yesterday's New York Times, Sunday's New York Times, it reported that African Americans made up 12% of the 99%, but only 2% of the top 1%. Great strides were made by Dr. King in the civil rights movement in racial equality and opportunity. And because of his work, there have been great gains made by many people. Angela talked about it earlier. But clearly there's more to be done. Just as Dr. King actively pursued economic justice later in his life, over 40 years later, the Occupy Wall Street movement is also, as I said, a direct descendant of that work. You know, I, along with the three delegates you heard from, Delegate Healy, Delegate Gaines, and Delegate Ross, we're committed to as much as within our power to continue that struggle for racial and economic justice in our work here in Annapolis. And for my agenda, and I don't want to speak for myself, although I think they'll probably say ditto on many of these, we need to end the death penalty in the state of Maryland once and for all. We need to ensure that all our county schools and all students in our county schools receive the funding to have a quality, full education. And as was spoken to earlier, during this belt-tightening time, we have to demand that all segments of our society pay their fair share. That means everybody. It shouldn't fall on the working, middle-income, and poor people. Those that have greater means, millionaires and billionaires, they have to pay their fair share as well. And discrimination, as you know better than I, it's not over, it's not gone. We still have the remnants. It's active, it's passive, but it's still there. We have to fight against discrimination and all its manifestations. Whether it's on race or whether it's restricting young Latinos' ability to go to college, or whether it's people with a different sexual orientation having all rights that you and I have. We have to fight against discrimination in any form. We have to continue that. We have to do that.
So.
And locally in the 22nd District, we want to make communities that have vitality, that are crime-free. We heard from the state's attorney, to reduce crime, to bring jobs, to restore energy, where it's a place people want to come to. We're happy there. We live there. As someone said, we have the most diverse district in the state of Maryland, of African Americans and whites and Latinos. And it's not just a passing fancy where, you know, whites are leaving or blacks are leaving or Latinos are leaving. It's moderately stable. And that's a good thing. It's something we should be proud of. but we have to add to that more jobs, more energy, more economic vitality, and we're committed to doing that as well. You know, drum major for justice, we heard that earlier, and you've probably read in the last couple of months, there's been a debate on the Martin Luther King Memorial that it has drum major for justice, but it sort of took the quote out of context. You know, he wasn't saying, I'm a drum major for justice and aren't I great? That's exactly what he wasn't saying, Dr. King. But they pulled that one phrase from the full quote. Now they're trying to figure out a way to either change it or add the fuller quote. And he did just as Angela Alston-Brooks said. He said it's part of a movement. You know, we don't need individuals. It's people fighting for justice. And I'm part of that movement. And that's the point he was trying to get across. And I think there's a lesson there. How important it was to have a memorial to Dr. Martin Luther King. But then we find out it's not done. We have to make corrections. We got to continue the struggle. We got to correct the phrases. So not only we get it right today, but for our children and our grandchildren. So too, I think, getting it right takes place when we talk about justice and jobs and equality. We have to continue to work to get it right. So too when it comes to those things, like fairness, like justice, like equality. We have to keep working to get it right, and we pledge to keep working for you to get it right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you at the front end, but I want to echo what my three delegate colleagues said, that the final thank you is for you. Not just for attending tonight and joining us in the spirit of community, but it's really you that make us want to do what we do. It's a caring community. You take care of yourselves. Kingswood has a civic association. They check on their neighbors. They do a great job. I want to thank Kingswood for coming here and for doing what they do. You know, Cleaned Up Democratic Club, they organize and keep people involved and engaged. That's important. But you're the vibrant community that we appreciate, that we respect, and that we love, that keeps us going. So with that, there's still dessert. There's still plenty of friends to talk to and good conversation. The session across the street will start at 8 o'clock if those of you want to come to the House Chamber or the Senate Chamber. But with that in mind, please have a safe safe ride home and a healthy year. And the buses will be leaving from, I believe, the same place they dropped you off on Round Boulevard at 8 o'clock. Thank you.
How were you there?
Oh, great, thank you.
Okay.
I'll drive back home, right?